Welcome to the film analysis. Today with Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb by Stanley Kubrick. Every film by Stanley Kubrick stands on its own, like the monolith from A Space Odyssey. But it seems to be a little different with Dr. Strangelove. Usually, Kubrick's films defy fashions and trends, but Dr. Strangelove seems at first glance like a direct reaction to past politics. In 1962, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis. In retrospect, we know of circumstances being dicier than anticipated at the time. The Cold War almost turned into a hot war, resulting in atomic bombs and millions of deaths. The diplomatic skill of Kennedy and Khrushchev and lucky coincidences prevented the worst. Fidel Castro thought it was conceivable, at least he wrote to Khrushchev, to use the atomic bomb after all. To Castro, the nuclear option represented the price in case the Americans invaded Cuba. The main issue was fighting American imperialism. In 1964, Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove hit the cinemas, a jet-black comedy about nuclear war and the end of humanity involving three locations. One is an airbase with a crazed general ruling. Second, the B-52 bomber launching an attack. Finally, the war room in the Pentagon. Peter Sellers plays an officer in the airbase trying to become a hero and receive the code to prevent the attack in time. Sellers also plays the sensible but clueless US president and the maniacal Dr. Strangelove. Marvelously, Sellers plays all three roles, although the Strangelove role remains iconic to this day. Game theory considerations shaped the Cold War. How does the enemy behave? How do we behave? Bureaucracy matters as well, chain of command levels, who is in charge, and two sides to technology exist. Firstly, there is the side of the technology enabling the bomb at all. Secondly, we have a technology including automated processes within the military as well as protection from the nuclear bomb. It all adds up to a melange where individuals don't have much say, it seems. But the general commands this nuclear war of aggression. The pilots are ordered to fly on Moscow and drop atomic bombs. The general is obsessed with the conspiracy theory. He suggests the Soviets have poisoned the American water and are thus seeking to destroy the Americans from within. In the war room at the Pentagon, the president and members of the military debate, some upset how to stop the air squadron in time. But the chain of command is not so easily broken. We witness the dark side of bureaucracy. The architecture of the war room is remarkably grandiose. Small people in an oversized space symbolizing the oversized power of these small people over the world. Meanwhile, the officer at the airbase, played by Peter Sellers, figures out the code to stop the disaster. The general, on the other hand, cannot be swayed, but it proves difficult to order all the planes back. A radio message does not reach one of the planes. It continues to fly towards Moscow. The Russians, as it turns out too late, have a doomsday machine automatically starting up in the event of a nuclear threat. The Russians have thus failed to follow the idea of deterrence theory. According to it, one must inform one's opponent about the nuclear option to reach deterrence. Kubrick shows us here in a wonderfully funny and dark way what is meant by the so-called fog of war. The end of humanity is sealed, but Dr. Strangelove takes it lightly. reflexively, his hand keeps wanting to raise in a Hitler salute. As the catastrophe sets in, he sits in a wheelchair all the time. Suddenly he stands up and says, "Mein Führer, I can walk again." He proposes to breed a small American elite in a nuclear shelter. In 100 years, the Earth may be habitable again. Kubrick stages a macabre spectacle featuring humanity's last hours resembling intimate theater. Kubrick precisely exposes deterrence theory's weaknesses. Many states claim to have nuclear weapons to deter the enemy, also possessing nuclear weapons with hopefully no party making use. Both parties are locked in a stalemate of the weak, becoming prisoners of their very own armament. Prisoners' dilemma characterizes the politics of the time, still relevant in rearmament today. The RAND Corporation was the central Cold War think tank and played out various scenarios of threat and deterrence. Kubrick also deals with this in Dr. Strangelove. Few consider political scientist Ron Robin's essay Balance of Determined or Error. At the time, two divergent positions prevailed at the RAND Institute. One was held by Albert Wohlstetter, the other by Bernard Brodie. Both were in favor of nuclear weapons and deterrence, but Wohlstetter calculated a worst-case scenario. An attack from the other side could happen abruptly. The USA would have to react quickly. Brodie, on the other hand, considered the Soviet Union a cumbersome giant with a large bureaucratic apparatus. Quick action was not to be expected. As Kubrick illustrates, even sluggish bureaucracy harbors danger. Wohlstetter disposed over mathematical analysis to outsmart the enemy. He evaluated data and believed that one could calculate the opponent's reaction at any time. Brodie, on the other hand, did not believe in this rationality, hence why Brodie did not want to hand over more power to the president under any circumstances. He argued, one hardly predicts the behavior of someone exposed to a dangerous situation. Ron Robin pointedly contrasts these two positions in his essay. He writes, while Wohlstetter explicitly trusted quantitative analysis to purge strategic studies of any bias, Brodie discovered serious flaws in the statistical calculation of the enemy's intentions. A reliance on numbers does not purge strategies of the analyst's political bias and his rapture over their own factors and dedications. He was exceedingly critical of Wohlstetter's deterministic portrayal of nuclear war and his willful omission of the fact that decision-making processes depended to a dangerous degree on moods in the heat of battle. Such reductionist thinking, Brodie argued, dispersonalized decision-making processes, creating the false impression that people and machines functioned according to principles that could be derived from data. End of quote. This corresponds to today's thinking, suggesting people to be computers and therefore predictable. Brodie disagrees with this thinking. The fear, he wrote, of a mad leader, a thermonuclear Hitler, could not be eliminated by machine-controlled strategies. This is brilliantly illustrated by Peter Sellers' Dr. Strangelove. Not functioning according to these rational principles, although possessing a doctorate, thus being a scientist, Kubrick opposes this presupposed rationality of Wohlstetter. His film is about human irrationality. The commanding general is driven by hatred. The Soviet Prime Minister is drunk. Dr. Strangelove is the Adolf of the nuclear age. The movie also bitterly criticizes two prevailing ideologies. Firstly, it denies everything being decided rationally. Secondly, it defies the belief that technology always works smoothly and clearly. No, in the end, a technical breakdown triggers the catastrophe. The radio message cannot be transmitted correctly. The German philosopher Günther Anders dealt with the nuclear threat throughout his life. He wrote, for example, the text Wir Eichmann-Söhne, Letters to the Son of the Nazi Eichmann, where he urges the son, the new generation, to consider which dangers lie ahead. The Nazi atrocities must not be repeated. Anders never received a reply to these letters, but a beautiful volume bundles them together. It states, what is true today is not that technology and enlightenment advance in step, but the reverse, that they are subject to the rule of inverted proportion. That is, the sharper the pace of progress, the greater the effects of our production, and the more intricate the structure of our apparatuses, the more rapidly our ideas and our perception lose their power to keep pace. The more rapidly our enlightenment declines, the more blind we become. And indeed we do. For what fails is not only this or that, not only our ideas and our perception. We become failures right down to the foundations of our existence. In other words, really in every respect. End of quote. Having seen Kubrick's film, we know exactly what this amounts to. We can't truly imagine the nuclear dimension as these Strangelove characters show. We talk about it far too rarely even today. This film is timeless, rendering us aware of the permanent threat, especially since world politics, if we only think of the Ukraine war and its protagonist, is by no means subject to rational principles. Rather, world politics is subject to whims and resentments. These cannot be the way. We have to see that the deterrence is not the right thing, but only by radical disarmament, so that these whims and resentments become less dangerous. This could be a way. That is the total opposite of recent politics with regards to the situation in Ukraine. And now every important country in the world is starting to build up their armaments. The nuclear threat is real, but we can hardly imagine it. Günther Anders referred to it as an apocalypse blindness. Cinema and Kubrick achieve the illustration of this very blindness. We should be precise when we talk about the film's humor. The depictions have nothing in common with irony or cynicism. Irony provides us the illusion of distance. We can always pretend not to be involved. Let's think of Full Metal Jacket. The ironic soldier with a peace dove on his helmet becomes the most effective fighting machine in the end. Irony pacts with the system. And it is another thing with cynicism. Cynicism is not what we can find in Dr. Strangelove. Even when, at the end, we see the mushroom clouds and hear the hit song, We'll Meet Again. Don't know where, don't know when. No, rather we experience a realistic humor. What does that mean? Let's imagine an alternative version of Dr. Strangelove, a serious Steven Spielberg version with worried-looking men. They would talk sense to each other, and one could prevent the apocalypse with a pathetic appeal of humanity. However, the Spielberg version featured too much faith in reason, not in the irrational, not in the danger posed by weapons simply because people have them at their disposal. Perhaps the Spielberg film would affect us a little, but far less than Kubrick's. The latter makes us aware of this incredible dimension possible by Kubrick's humor alone. The film's characters don't represent the farce. Peter Sellers embodies three characters portraying a kind of everyman. No, the real farce consists of a few people deciding over humankind's fate. A farce only probably dealt with by Kubrick's realistic humor. The latter is bitter, but lets us see and not watch. It would be nice if you would like to support the film analysis financially. You can do so via my bank account or PayPal. Also, you can find me on Patreon. Thank you very much.